Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and the building and completion of this character was basically just a confirmation that Scorching is in a really good place right now, especially with the life-based and mind over matter versions, to kill all endgame bosses and just have a strong boss farming character for the endgame, especially as a starter build. Overall, there is nothing terribly expensive in the build that you have to get, and mine only actually really utilizes a level 21 Scorching Ray, which I vowed myself anyway. Overall, it is just a fairly economical, I'd say, endgame farmer. This Phoenix here, for example, was a minus max version and is still pretty damn hard to fuck up and lose to. And then every other Guardian map I'll be showing you does have a few little nasty mods up its sleeve, and they're all very manageable and deathless for the most part, I believe. And it is a really good introduction skill and build, I believe, for a lot of this endgame content, because it does give you a lot of time to react to things with the amount of defenses you have and with the way the skill works. It's just a bit of ramp. There's no nothing too flashy. There's nothing unexpected. It's almost always going to be at your maximum, just having to ramp your stacks, get out of the way of a few attacks, and really gives you the opportunity to play around the content if you've never seen it before, especially. Though it won't ever really be the fastest boss killer for all of this shit, it is definitely, I think, the most reliable. As most characters, I have to wait until I am fully leveled up and ready to go to waste some XP on a few dangerous boss kills here or there. With Scorching Ray, there isn't really much of that. I can just about jump into Guardian maps, Eaaaaased, and Shaper mid-leveling route, because I'm fairly confident in my ability to not die here and just have a few clean kills if I really care about not dying. Now that just depends on how hard you want to zerg a boss, but you definitely can get away without having to take any damage on just about all of these boss fights, except for potentially Minotaur, which is the next one straight after this, because it is a bit of a tricky fight as Scorching Ray. You can't apply the usual Minotaur killing method. Here it is, the usual Minotaur killing method of a endgame character to just stand there, face tank, and blow them up immediately. You kind of have to dodge, run around a lot, and it just gets a little tricky at times if he stacks the arenas with too many bad, well, circles that drop the rocks. And if you dive through that shit when you're not supposed to. Overall, it just depends on the mods that the Minotaur has. If he's got some pretty tricky mods, he will be hard for Scorching Ray indeed. One of the hard ones I did was 100% increased area, and that means every time he's slamming, he's basically covering the entire screen with the rock falling zone, and you have to really place them carefully and choose when to face tank appropriately. And the other issue is he does quite a lot of burrows when you're running around, and that means you're always going to be resetting your burn stacks, so you have to then reapply all the way back up to maximum, and it does make for a slightly slower kill than some of the other Guardians potentially. Now, as far as Shaper goes, it's fairly straightforward. The Unshaped over here, really hard to die to him. You just basically stand and keep getting your stacks going, and he doesn't really do any damage to, so it's not a big deal. Shaper as well, this is a really good character to learn the fight on, because you can take damage from just about everything and then react slower, and also just learn what you're supposed to do ideally in the perfect situation. He doesn't really deal too much damage to us. Our damage, however, is not incredible, so it will give you plenty of opportunity once again to learn the fight, because you're not going to instantly blow him up and skip many of the phases or anything. The biggest issue, I'd say, is probably the ads. Especially for me, because I'm running Witchfire Brew here, so you don't always have your permanent double curse. You can really notice when you press the Witchfire to get your double curse going and kill the ads a lot faster. So you may have to save the flask for that, or try and get a permanent vulnerability set up in your Blasphemy, or just Orb of Storms as well. Besides that, you can take about just about everything from Shaper, and even avoid a lot of this shit just by having a bit of practice standing far away from him there. Ideally though, you're standing right on top of him so that he's only meleeing you and not constantly throwing balls out. So it may take a little practice getting used to the Shaper fight and perfecting it, but I think Scorching Ray's not a bad option. Just make sure you wait until your character is fairly well geared and has level 20 gems and all of that. And then we'd come onto Eaaaaased, and once again, I think this is a really good character to learn the fights with, because it gives you plenty of time to appreciate what the bosses, the monsters are doing for you or against you, and it's also pretty damn hard to die to them, at least in my current character's situation. I can make mistakes and still survive quite a lot, but at this stage of my gear I am fairly well defended, so you may not reach the same levels of defense unless you get everything just right, and the Harbinger shield really does go a long way towards making us a lot more sustainable against this sort of shit. You try and keep up Fortify with your shield charge at all times, and I can even take the rain from the ranged chick in the trio with plenty of time to move out of it, and by plenty of time I mean, yeah, half a second, as opposed to the usual just insta die. So it does give you the opportunity to learn when that's happening or how it's happening and jump out of the way. Now, as I said though, it's not the flashiest of boss killers. You're not going to be too wowed by the supreme DPS, but it is very reliable and very solid, and you can even just, you know, take a lot of damage from just about everything with the amount of regen we have and the mind over mattering. And then lastly we have Eaaaaased over here, who I didn't even have a permanent bleed flask for, so if you really want to make it a lot more reliable, get one of those. For the most part though, very reliable. You can see that the spears, I can actually take quite a lot in this setup when you do see the spears coming in. Usually a character may get close to one shot by spears in my other setups. This one here, however, can take plenty, and like I said, this is a great one to just learn what you have to do to be able to dodge things when the attacks are coming and how to dodge them. So I am kind of trying to put on a bit of a show here to really show you what you're dodging, when you're dodging, how it can be avoided. But a lot of the time I'm just taking things as they come because I don't have to dodge them since I am so tanky. And that is a bit of a problem, and that is not the way I typically like to play my characters or this game. I really prefer the higher DPS and more evasion-y type of method because I just like to be able to play around what the monsters are throwing at you without trying to take any of their damage for the most part. A lot of it out there though is fairly unavoidable, and you are just going to have to take some damage, so that's where the defenses do come into play in builds like this anyway. Fairly reliable boss killer here, did do a couple of good runs for Eaaaaased, a couple of good shapers, and all kinds of guardians. And then lastly, if you are unaware, this Scorching Ray is an amazing Hall of the Grandmaster's character, simply because block does not negate or affect your Scorching Ray at all, and that is the biggest defense that a lot of these characters have against your traditional sort of character. The block and the regen they possess may make some of them really hard to kill, and as well as that, if you have a fairly squishy character, a lot of these Hall of Grandmasters dudes will instantly kill you. This Scorching Ray character over here with a lot of regen and mana regen, mind over matter, really does not get phased too much by most of these Grandmasters. Now once again, a permanent bleed flask like on a Stib Knight would go a long way here. I didn't even bother using that because I figured I'd be fine. Ended up running about 5 runs and dying maybe once per run due to, you know, certain circumstances, but for the most part you can see how this could be farmed very quite easily, efficiently with Scorching Ray, because the damage is just so reliable against all of these guys and they die simply too quick with this Scorching Ray, even the toughest of guys in here. The farm though, it's not really that worth it. It's entirely up to you, and it's just a bit of a novelty map to run if you want to try something different. Now before I go, I do want to make a quick final wrap on gear, gems, and also the low life option, which I didn't take this time, but I do want to show you what it would have looked like if I tried it, you know, barring a few extra customizations. The only other thing I wanted to mention is Belt of the Deceiver. You can use that instead of Immortal Flesh. That would just be a bit of extra damage gained across the board, as well as getting a bit of extra resist, so it makes resist a lot easier to cap. Currently with my Immortal Flesh I am fine with my resists, but you know, if you put this on, then it makes resists that much easier, and what it does is give you an additional 10% damage basically. So if you have 400,000 on Shaper, it'll give you about 440, which is a solid little upgrade if you don't want to use Immortal Flesh. However, Immortal Flesh is currently about 15% or so, maybe 20% of both my mana and life regen, so it is a fairly handy tool, as well as a little bit of survivability from the defense. Now, besides that, the only other thing I did change since last time, I believe, is I'm not sure if I crafted this, I can't remember. I think this is already crafted. It's not a very good marble amulet, but yeah, just a marble amulet. And then I crafted a couple of opal rings with anger essences. If you want to maximize the damage of your build, you will have to go the anger essence route against opal rings, because a good, anger opal can give you 50% fire damage if you're not running an opal, and if it doesn't have an anger essence, that's 50% damage you are losing on each ring slot. And you can imagine that's an extra good jewel slot, for example. So it is a fairly big deal if you avoid this entire route. But yeah, anger essences on here. Try and get some life, mana, regen. Any of that is really good. Otherwise, you don't really need resists because you can get them just about everywhere else. So for the most part, just get some anger essences and do whatever you can with your rings. They turned out pretty good though for the mana regen, in my opinion. And the other thing I did since the last video is grab a 6-link armor and energy shield chest. This is a Saint's Hauberk, which I believe is the highest armor version of these chests. Simply, I just bought a 6-link, which, can run you anywhere from currently 40 chaos to about 150 chaos, depending on the quality of the base. If you just want to go a cheap one, then a Devout Chainmail, which is the card one, the one you can get from divination cards, I believe, will only run you about 40 or 50 C, and that will be a much stronger defensive option than Tabula, because basically all you're looking for is a big life roll. And I got this roll through Shrieking Greed Essences, so it just gives you a guaranteed life roll, and then you're trying to get a bit of strength, int, mana, resists, armor. It doesn't really matter too much. It's mostly just about the life roll, getting a little bit of armor into the build as opposed to the Tabula. Though the Tabula with +1 level of gems is definitely going to be the biggest DPS option. This is just a nice solid tank option and still fairly cheap for a 6-link because there's a lot of them out there and they really don't cost that much. And then you just greed essence them yourselves. And besides that, I did, of course, get my level 21 Scorching Ray. I bought a level 20 because I could not be bothered waiting for my Scorching Rays to level to 20. Evolved it once and got a level 21. Now, if you just want a reliable level 21 without having to pay a few exalts for it, basically what I did and what you should do for most skills, but especially things like Scorching Ray, is level a bunch of them in the offhand right from level 1. So at level 1, I bought 5 of these at 16 quality, 6 in total if you count the one I was using. You have these in your offhand. As soon as they hit level 20, vial them. Chances are you're going to get a level 21. And that is a very nice boost to your character overall. So we'll have the full character linked in the build thread and the path of building if you want to, check him out and see what's happening, compare it to yours and all that. Overall on Shaper, I had about 410,000 DPS. That's at 8 stages. Make sure you're highlighting that. And it might not be the most impressive damage number, but the reason it's still decent is because it's such reliable damage. You get it up on him, your damage, and then it'll just keep going as long as you keep the stacks going. You don't really have to worry or focus too much about flasks and charges and all of that, because we don't even use charges, at least not in our configuration or boss DPS, since they're very rarely down. If you can get them up, then shit, that's a bunch of extra damage, but we're not currently doing that. And then for the low life version, I've just mocked one up here. It's kind of, I don't know if it's actually even worth doing. I've basically put in just about ideal-ish gear that is fairly achievable with an exalt or so per gear slot, and you do run something like 9 to 10,000 energy shield. I'm not terribly sure it's worth it. It does give you more damage in the end. Now this is against non-Shaper. With against Shaper, it's 20% more or so at this point. As far as I can tell, I'm only using 4 of my jewel sockets because they're 4 props over here. So, that's pretty unrealistic. So I'm not even factoring in the last jewel. Really depends on what's available to you. But the goal here is to have a higher life pool, which is, 9,000 ES instead of the 5 or 6k life you can get. And then through using Pain Attunement, you get 30% more spell damage. And that's basically where all of the difference in damage comes from, because the rest of the tree is pretty similar as far as the amount of damage you get. It's just basically building around 30% more spell damage. And it should, in the ideal circumstances, be worth it. But right now, I don't really see any need for it. A Shabs is going to cost you just a bit more than a regular chest would, and ultimately I don't think this boost in DPS is that necessary, and it may just be a less comfortable playstyle because you don't really have Life Flask, for example, to just quickly boost your life up in tough situations. So I will link this for you as well if you want it. There's probably going to be, changes as you go and customize it, because these theory crafted versions are never actually perfected builds. They change and you grab what you need as you need while actually playing them. In any case, guys, that's Scorching Ray as a wrap for Harbinger League. It was a pretty fun, satisfying skill for me. Not the funnest by any means, and some people just plain hate seeing it or using it. I know chat definitely riots every time I play some Scorching Ray, but I still enjoy the skill personally, enough to at least give it a run every single league. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the Scorching Ray wrap-up, and I'll see you next time.